I've been playing a little bit of TCG for the first time in potentially a number of years now, at least consistently anyway. Been playing on and off stream, haven't made any YouTube videos or anything about it, but just as a little secondary addendum to my regular content creation and Master Duel grinding or YouTube video making that we've done over the last couple of months, years really at this point as well. So this video is basically just exploring my personal experiences with the new post-Justice Hunters metagame and what my opinions and views are and what it's felt like jumping in what essentially feels like to me as somewhat of a returning player experience. This has been a big learning process, but also kind of a shock and surprise in many ways, despite being a veteran of the game that has played for over 10 years at this point. So yeah, that's kind of the whole point of this. Nothing too flashy or particularly crazy happening on screen. It's just my ramblings and thoughts as which I should probably caveat and disclaim now, essentially from the perspective of a literal dad gamer, just a total casual, dabbling here and there, in and out, getting in a couple of hours per week, online or even in person. I haven't actually been to a locals yet. I have the physical cards, but I have done a lot of prep either on automatic sims like Omega, I think it is, the one that has ranked, and then of course Dueling Book as well, which is manual and you have to handle everything yourselves, which we'll get into that soon. So just to really make sure that you're aware of the fact that this is not some sort of objective analysis, some sort of, you know, sweeping statement conclusion that you need to kind of draw as a representation of the totality of the Yugioh metagame or anything like that. It's literally just a casual's view of TCG after having essentially been out of the loop for quite a significant number of significant amount of time at this stage. So yeah, well, let's begin. Decided to hop back in with Justice Hunters since it made the most sense, considering it's the biggest meta shift we've had in quite a while anyway. Sort of moving away from the previous decks of Raizio, Mitsu, and Malice, which I am somewhat familiar with, especially now that they're here in Master Duel. Very different metagame for those decks previously, but this would be the greatest opportunity, I think, for me. I don't want to get too deep into things like the costs and logistics and admin of TCG. I've kind of talked about this in previous videos before with regards to barrier to entry, how much you need to pay, and just sort of the logistics of it from my personal perspective as someone who is just really busy now. So having the ability to go to locals with a family and stuff is not exactly the luxury that I'm going to have multiple times a week like I used to when I was younger. So again, most of this experience comes from my online play. Anyway, that's to say that pretty much I decided to jump back into Justice Hunters with Draco Tale. I don't know what it is. Perhaps it is sort of like the edgy lore kind of theme and stuff inside of me that kind of just gravitated me towards it. I'm not particularly sure why. I just ended up feeling that vibe a little bit more. I wasn't picking this deck out of some sort of a you know, deterministic type of analysis of the meta game or some sort of prediction as to the card prices spiking or not based off of its competitive performance at the tier 3 event level. No, it's just fusion summon big guy, you do a couple of plays here and there, and that's kind of your turn. So that's basically it. Now, I guess I might as well mention it as a tangent, but it's not really the main purpose of this. Like I said, this is not about the logistics and admin of Yugioh. We've talked about prices and costs and all that kind of stuff multiple times, but I picked up an entire core for £90, which once you add in your hand trap staples and stuff, and Draco Tale is a deck that utilizes primarily monster-related hand traps, things like Nibiru, Charmies, Phantasmes, etc. I mean, you're probably not spending more than 150, 200 at a push. You might want to optimize a little bit more with things like K9 and Fiendsmith, I suppose, but there are versions of the deck, and I think even Jesse Cotton topped recently with a more kind of vanilla approach to the deck, just heavy hand traps and stuff, and I believe that one was kind of a little bit more budget. So that's all round positives. I think when you make a set that has multiple different good decks inside them, it doesn't really matter what high rarity card you pull, it's going to be a good card because all the decks are good. So in some ways that's good, in other ways it can be a negative from the product perspective, because it just means that this product of Justice Hunter is a banger, local stores are going to thrive off of that, but then you just have this like drought period like we've had for the past 6 months where, you know, Duels Advance and the one at the start of the year in February, the one with the hero stuff, I mean, they're just dud sets that basically rot doing nothing. Why would Master Duel do this? Sorry, we're not getting into that. Anyway, so let's talk about the gameplay a little bit. I think what really struck me about this deck was it felt like a sort of fusion-based version of Sword Soul. Sword Soul, a deck which I'm pretty familiar with, and in fact, my first and only ever Premier event top comes from playing Sword Soul, so it's a nice little similarity in that regard. It just feels like a deck that is very low skill entry, but also has the potential for a significant amount of skill expression at the highest level. Just the decision trees that you're making at any one time based off of what you decide to use as a fusion material, what you specifically send from your deck with things like Rahu and things like that, is actually really important in approaching turn 3, turn 4, etc., etc. And all of these choices are very meaningful in what they achieve. But on top of that, when your first turn is essentially just like 4 or 5 activations, it's literally like a normal summon, get a guy, perform a fusion summon, add back a thing, maybe fuse again, pass, right? Like, it's that in itself, I think, is really, really cool. And I do enjoy that aspect a lot, because when you're playing against the deck, you know, one of the biggest gripes that casuals especially have with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is unironically the no-joke 37-minute turn that decks just have these days. So that can be very frustrating, and one thing I really loved about Draco Tale was, like, there are some really crazy big turns you can do with the deck depending on the build you want to play, like, you know, if you utilize Fiendsmith. But just from a Draco Tale perspective, you don't really have too much to do, and I think that's really good, because you are usually interacting with your opponent in that way, in that first turn, as well as just doing a couple of basic plays. Don't worry, we're going to get into the details of interacting with your opponent in a bit, because this whole your turn, our turn thing that has become a standard with this set is definitely divisive, and something I'm going to discuss a little bit more in depth in a moment. But just in terms of the ease of access, I love this deck. I never really got to try the other ones. I think Yummy is maybe a little bit harder to learn, but once you learn it, it's quite linear perhaps in some ways. Not a big fan of that deck. I think that playstyle is definitely one of the more egregious offenders for negativity that sometimes players can have attributed to Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of the fact that you just end on so many multiple disruptions that it can be very overwhelming. But that's besides the point. This isn't really about Yummy specifically. I don't know too much about the deck. I'm just talking about the experiences that I had. And one of the most interesting experiences that I had was I really felt like I was learning the game again. I really felt like I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh! From scratch. It was almost as if my brain has been wiped, and maybe this wasn't helped from the ability to, or from the fact that we were playing on Dueling Book, which you have to do everything yourself, unlike Master Duel, which handholds you with all of the automatic simulating triggers and stuff like that. But every single moment of the duel feels like it's very overwhelming, because there are multiple card effects being activated, and then on the new chain multiple triggers go off, which then lead to you using more quick effects, which then relate to your opponent chaining you know, I know it sounds very obvious. It's like, wow, players are interacting and activating cards against one another. That's crazy. No, but something about this format, this specific set, felt like it was way more than normal. And that ties in, I suppose, to this next point here. It's the your turn, our turn. There are multiple cards that are in this set which have been designed to allow you to kind of turn Yu-Gi-Oh! Into, at an absolute stretch, best or worst case scenario, I suppose, depending on which way you view if this is good gameplay or not for you, is like this simultaneous card game of like Street Fighter TCG, right? Like, you're both activating and doing things at the same time, and every new deck has some of those aspects associated with. You've got Faimina, you've got Holisu, and you've got Azuna. These cards all together are promoting interaction, turn 0, despite the fact you may or may not have drawn a hand trap. It almost feels like hand traps in some way are getting dated. And what I mean by that is, this was particularly egregious, I think, in 2024, right? Now, your opponent normal summons a Snake Eye Ash, and then you activate Infinite Impermanence. And then they just go Diabell, discard, special summon. And then it's like, oh damn, okay, well now I have to use Valor on this. But then they just link the two bodies together and they make Close Moon, and then that gets the full combo anyway. It's like you've just discarded cards. You have just thrown cards away into the graveyard, and you haven't really meaningfully achieved anything. So regular hand traps can sometimes feel like, at least previously, I've essentially kind of boiled down to sometimes a whack-a-mole type of situation. Either you want to maybe like hold for a choke point, rather than just imperming something as important or as impactful as, like, you know, a Dormouse normal summon. Perhaps you just assume they're going to have the extender, assume they have a way to keep playing, and you hit the red ransom or something, right? So those are like some of the options you can use previously to try and interact with your opponent. But now what's changed and what's different is we are very much playing decks at the same time. Now, the only downside is if you don't draw these cards, it can feel very sad, I suppose. But if both players open well, you are just having what feels like super watered-down Tier Limit mirrors. The Tier Limit mirror is definitely a full-power Tier Limit mirror, anyway, is definitely a controversial topic to highlight and talk about. But there's a very good reason why a lot of people bring these up. Now, I didn't participate in that format. I've never actually played a full power back and forth mirror with that deck ever, except one time against Jesse at a table at a YCS for fun. And I think after about 20 minutes of the standby phase, I got bored and I had 5 cards left in my deck, and that was just too much. I don't think I could play in that. Now, that's not to go on a tangent and talk about the healthiness or not of Tier Limit, but I will just say that from a very one-game simple introduction, and playing against the world champion maybe doesn't help, I just didn't, it was too much. It was just far too overwhelming. These decks are obviously similar in that regard, that you're trying to do things on each other's turn, but it's, you know, significantly less powerful than what Tier Limit was capable of. But it's very interesting that they decided to go into this direction of utilizing hand traps as a form of engine, as a form of active gameplay, rather than just whack-a-mole hand trap and hoping that your opponent doesn't have exact perfect extender to deal with Ash or to deal with Imperm. These type of cards are getting really frustrating for me to play with, and I think that just from a lot of duels that I've witnessed, they're getting really boring. I don't think I really like this new direction, because it sort of incentivizes a lot of gameplay rather than just one person doing one thing and then hoping it's enough to cut you off. Now, when you draw Femina, you really feel powerful, despite the fact that you're going second. Likewise, I assume if you're playing Vanquish Soul, if you draw Holy Sewer, if you draw Azuna, it can feel like a whole different game, right? And I think that's a really positive thing. Now, this is a strange thing, but the next thing I wanted to talk about was, it's so hard. Maybe I'm getting old, maybe perhaps it's just skill issue, but it's so difficult. Like, it's not really that the decks are hard, it's just that because there is so much constant interaction, and anything in life, it just needs a little bit of practice. And I've probably dedicated, perhaps, over the last month, 12 to 15 hours total of gameplay. A couple times a week for the last month or so is what I've actually managed to free myself up to be able to play some games online. And what I'm finding is that it is so much. There's so much to go. It's not so much a case of I don't know what to do when I normal summon Lucas and where do I go from there. It's more so that I activate a card and then my opponent chains a card. And then now I have an option to chain a card, or I could hold here. But if I proceed in this flowchart direction, I now need to think about them triggering on the new chain a new card that then interacts with my card, and which one goes where on the chain, and what I have to search in order to have that card ready for the turn 2, etc, etc. And these are all things that have kind of always been prevalent in Yu-Gi-Oh! And are something that you just learn as you get better at the game, but it just really felt like, not really mechanically is what I'm struggling with here. It's the understanding and knowing, and knowledge rather, of when I should be triggering certain things, or when I should be going for Just something as a basic example, like what do I send from my deck with Rahu? Am I going to send Malulu to try force something out? Am I going to go for the dragon to try and pop a card? And then the way my opponent interacts with that, it then kind of leads back to what I'm going to do in response to that, but then that might have them do something else. This is all very archaic, or rather arbitrary in the way that I'm describing it, and I know it does really probably just boil down to skill issue, and it comes with familiarity, but it just felt, even from me, really overwhelming, where a normal summon results in 4 cards in a chain link, and then the new chain results in 3 card effects on the chain, and then from there, it just felt really overwhelming. Like, there is so much going on constantly, and you really need to know the rules of the game from a base, like, language level, like your PSET, your mandatory versus optional, your turn player versus non-turn player priority triggers and all that kind of stuff. It really felt like there was so much going on, and having to map out and think about it all the time was quite overwhelming. And this is not even looking at it from a tournament perspective. This is playing online where you have infinite time, realistically, within reason anyway. Just imagining something like this occurring at the tournament level, where you are trying to map out all of these different triggers and stuff against your opponent, resolving everything correctly and not like illegally or anything like that, while also facing down a 45-minute round timer, or 50-minute now. They made some changes recently. I don't know if it's been implemented, but the point is, it's like having a full match of Yu-Gi-Oh just feels like you are really having to race, like, from moment one to make sure that time isn't actually something that you both go into, because from what I understand, time is pretty much a double negative at this point. It's really bad. There's almost no positives to going to time now. I generally don't remember if those rules have been implemented or will be implemented. It's the World Championship ones that I think Konami are thinking about implementing, although there hasn't been any confirmation after Worlds. But yeah, that's a different subject altogether. So anyway, that's just kind of like some random musings and thoughts. By the way, the takeaway from all of this was that nothing I said was like a negative per se. It's actually super fun. That's the crazy thing, right? Just to make sure that you understand that nothing I said was a negativity. That's all incredible. Like, it was so enjoyable. It was really fun. And I had a great time because at every moment I was doing something. There are far too many games when I'm playing Master Duel, and it's just tab out gameplay, right? I hope that these decks come to the game soon, but for the last like year or two, anytime I've went on ranked in Master Duel, it just feels like half of the duel I'm tabbed out. I'm literally like talking to my Twitch chat. I am doing something else on my second monitor. Like, it's so bland, it's so boring, and probably why I think I've hit master rank like 3 times this whole year. It's so boring. It's just not fun to play Modern. But in TCG, it's been night and day. It's a whole different game, literally. And it's funny because this whole time I felt like maybe I'm getting disillusioned with Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Per se. That's why I've really focused on playing things like Draft and doing all the sandbox style challenges and stuff like that, which has been really fun and awesome, because ultimately Yu-Gi-Oh! At its core is an incredibly fun game, and that's what Justice Hunter has really taught me. Is I am having so much fun playing this new format with these new decks that it is a far cry from all of the gameplay we've had and that I've personally experienced over the last year or two, especially in Master Duel, because there's other problematic cards in that game, like Maxi, etc. So don't want to get into like the very nitty-gritty specifics and stuff like that. This was all of this to say essentially that I've really enjoyed the game. It felt somewhat overwhelming. It does kind of seem like there's maybe a bit of a high barrier to entry into this current format in TCG, but I don't think this is anything particularly new, and I don't think this is something that is actually unique to Justice Hunter, but it really does feel like while the decks are quite deceptively simple, so much of your knowledge and so much of your skill as a player is fully tested to the complete extent in a back and forth real game. Sitting down and just doing a combo feels somewhat easier than it has been over the last year or two, actually. Especially when I've been playing Draco Tale, right? It's quite simple to just do like a decent end board with that deck. And you can get a lot of good value just from activating like 3 or 4 cards compared to, 30-step combos that Malice or Snake Eye has had over the last couple of years. So it's been a real breath of fresh air for me in that regard. But it just feels like you need to invest a lot of time into practicing and playing against real people and real opponents, and it's not enough to just read your cards, know what they do, because you need to know how they work and what they do against a real person and how they interact versus certain decks and vice versa. This is all well and good, by the way, don't get me wrong. Like that, in the end, like ultimately, you want the person with the most knowledge to be the one that triumphs a game. Like logically, that just makes the most sense, of course. It's just felt like the entry, like if the actual ability to win games was somewhere like here at the entry level, nowadays it feels like it's like up here, right? It seems like you need to be really well versed and practiced in just the actual current game to take down some duels. Now, while I actually won almost every game except one, and that was when I played against someone who was in a mirror match against me, and I've never been so smoked in my entire life. I was done in 10 minutes, I got 2-0'd. No floodgates or anything involved. I was just completely cooked, outplayed. Malulu was used at the right times on the new chains with the triggers and all that kind of stuff, and ultimately that's a positive thing. But it just really felt like there's so much practices involved. It feels like to really be up to date as a TCG player, to really be at your absolute maximum extent and capability as a TCG player, you can't just dabble with a couple of games per week. I think is really maybe not a problem, but it's definitely a thing. I don't think you're going to see any success, even at a local level, depending on how good your locals is, by just jamming a few games a week. It really feels like you really, really need to understand what you're doing to beat people this format, which is good, I suppose, right? In the end, that's a good thing. It's just a lot. So double-edged sword in some ways, especially from the perspective of someone who doesn't have a lot of time to play and doesn't have a lot of time to invest in. That's not to like sit here and complain that I'm going to lose games at locals because I just don't play as much. It's just kind of interesting that previously there are decks that can just sort of muscle your way through to victories because they're just so good or so powerful. So I guess this is like pretty much a positive thing. It's just there's a lot to get to a basic level, compared to when I can't really think of an example at the top of my deck, but if you take the most absolute extreme case, to get to a level that is somewhat competent in like GOAT format, it's not that hard, right? You're literally doing 2 things at a turn, whereas in modern, like 50 plus effects between you and your opponent joined together are happening over the course of a duel, right? It's a lot, and you just need to navigate that properly, and that's where a lot of the skill comes from. So good thing at the same time, but also just, requires a lot of time and investment. Anyway, TCG is in a very exciting place right now, so that's good. Been having a lot of fun with it, and now that my Wednesdays have finally been freed up, gonna be going back to my first locals on Wednesday. I don't know if I'm gonna, I was thinking of like just pressing go live on my phone and just no cam, no real meaningful commentary or audio, just let it play and people can watch my local games or something if they're bored. Or I was potentially considering vlogging them or something again, maybe just for the first time. Or maybe when I get to a level where I feel somewhat comfortable and competent enough to like be sure of myself playing a deck, then I might do a little vlog or 2 here and there. But it's been a great experience. I've had a lot of fun. It's super, super enjoyable. TCG's in a very positive place, at least from a gameplay perspective. Hopefully they fix all the other crap surrounding TCG that has existed for as long as, we've talked about. Product being crap, accessibility to cards, although current format is actually quite good. Thanks everyone for tuning in, I suppose. Appreciate it. It's been a fun one. I'll see you guys in the next video. Stay tuned for the Farfa TCG arc, potentially. Bye-bye.